annoying part where I have to get.
What have got in the background of us? An unfinished quilt.
It is an unfinished quilt. Might get on with that tomorrow actually. Just doing all of my jags. God, that's really big, isn't it? Hello. So I'm just checking that everybody can see us. This is a live video. It's not going to be edited. It's not going to be edited at all. There we go. Everybody can watch us.
Hello. Welcome.
Warm welcome. Okay, got another one. I don't know why I printed this one.
You might lie. Do you know it by heart?
No. No, I don't know it by heart. But it's very long. I don't know if I'm going to get bored.
Agree.
Bagley and Wright. Who are they?
Who are they? Who are they?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Bagley and Wright was a spinning, doubling and weaving company based in Oldham, Lancashire.
All right. No.
Round the corner from where we live.
Mm-hmm.
Oldham's Manchester, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oldham's around about Manchester way. The business was active from 1867 to 1924, caught the wave of the cotton boom that existed following the end of the American Civil War of 1865 and experienced rapid growth in the United Kingdom and abroad. Oh, and by the way, if you want to read along with this, you can do so on Wikipedia. That's where I've got this from. And we're just going to have a see if there's any funny bits in it or interesting bits.
That you can't say.
Words that I can't say. Do you have your Google handy?
I've got my Google handy.
So Google's going to help me when I can't pronounce things, which will probably be coming up pretty soon. In 1897, the business split into two, with the sewing cotton operation being subsumed into the newly formed English Sewing Cotton Company. Do you know it?
Subsumed?
I was thinking like split up, subsumed. The remainder of the Bagley and Wright business remained independent in the form of Bagley and Wright manufacturing, although they're subsumed. Although the Wright and Bagley families lost influence on the ESCC part of the business following a scandal. See?
There's always scandals.
Over the distribution of dividends. They remained in control of Bagley and Wright's manufacturing until it was finally dissolved in 1924. Throughout the existence of the business, the influence of subsume.
Is how you spell it, is it? Subsume.
Past. Oh, to absorb something. Okay.
All right.
Throughout the existence of the business, the influence of the Wesleyan Church in Oldham was substantial in the formation of the friendships and partnerships that were the endings for the business's success. There we go. I've got some tea. I have tea.
God.
Oh, your chair's in the background as well.
Yes, the chair. The chair.
We don't talk about the chair.
Not at the moment.
It's in the naughty corner.
It is. I will get that done.
Benjamin Wright and Ralph Bagley were born in 1837 and 1839, respectively. Wright was born into poverty in Ashton-under-Lyne. Underline. Where's that? Is that down south somewhere?
I I don't,
Or is that up
can't
north as well?
I'm sure that's not.
His father William and mother Mary were born in 1803 in Ashton, and by 1841 were
Ashton's
living
in Preston.
in the village of Lees on the border of Oldham, and had nine children. The three oldest children were working as cotton piecers. The middle three were at school, and Benjamin and William Jr. were at preschool. Father William was an operative cotton spinner, but Mary was not employed. Despite three of the children being employed, the family was poor.
Oh,
Oh, it's Manchester.
I'm sure we've got Ashton in there.
So the kids are working, but they're still poor.
How? What are they spending their money on? Jeez, dear.
The father would command a reasonable wage, but the children would contribute little to the family income. What are they spending their money on?
I know, what are they spending their money on?
So the middle three were at school. Wait a minute here. The three oldest children were working as cotton piecers. So the oldest three were 17, 15 and 14.
So they were earning money. They had three children bringing in money.
But they wouldn't contribute to the family's income. With 6 dependent mouths to feed, the family would have found life a struggle, and the fact that Sarah was age 11, was still at school, suggests that the parents were committed to their children's betterment.
What?
Financial pressure increased in 1843 with the birth of Joseph, who was to play a major part in the business. Benjamin started work at the age of 7 in 1845. You know, I should do go out to work at 7. I guess they did back then. So this is why they brought in, like, do you know, the school act and that, because the kids were going out working and they weren't getting an education, were they? His first job was as a little piecer in Henry Atherton's wood and cotton mill on Woodend Street in Leeds. This involved fetching and carrying for the spinner and piecer, as well as keeping the mules cleaned by sweeping behind the carriages.
So was that just a go for, just doing this and just bits and bobs of jobs?
Basically. He worked his way through the usual progression from little piecer to piecer. Sometime around the age of 20, was working as a qualified spinner. He moved to work for Daniel Colleen and Sons at Moore Hay Mills, known locally as Dan Cole's factory. I must have impressed because he was given the position as outlooker at Dan Cole's, and subsequent to that became manager of the mill. Well, he worked his way up, didn't he?
Yeah, that's what they used to do, isn't it? They used to start at the bottom and go.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best way to work, to learn a job.
To
isn't it?
learn, yeah. Especially when you get to management level and you know that everybody.
I used to show you how it felt like at the bottom as well.
Yeah.
But it should have done anyway.
Let's find out. It is not known how Benjamin Wright and his future business partner Ralph Bagley first met. However, it is known that they both worked at Dan Cole's. So Ralph was born at Cowes Hill, Oldham, son of Thomas Bagley, a general labourer, and Hannah, a cotton hand loom weaver. Thomas had been born in Manchester and Hannah in Cheshire. In 1851, Ralph was 12 years old, and he and his younger sister Anne were at school. That Ralph was not in full employment at the age of 12 is unusual for working families at the time, and reflects the fact that the family was small and the children were at an age where both parents were able to work. It's possible that the family had a loom in their home for Hannah to work on, and this could have been an important factor. You're practicing.
Like I need to do.
So I keep thinking of getting a loom, and I don't know why. It's like another thing.
So where are you going to put it?
I don't know. No, you can get small, like kids ones.
Oh, right.
You don't have to be a big one. Or get Neil in the garage making me one.
Oh,
Could you imagine?
Yeah. Oh dear.
It is known that Ralph also had an older sister called Sarah, who would have been 17 years old. However, Sarah does not appear in the 1851 census as resident at Cow Hill, and she may have been living somewhere else as a living housemaid. By 1861, she had returned to the family home to live with Thomas, Ralph, and Anne. Thomas was the dad, 65, and then Ralph and Anne were the brother and sister, 21 and 19. So by 1861, there's no record of Ralph's mother, Hannah, who would have been 62 at the time. The average age of death for a working class woman was, how old?
That would probably quite young, isn't it?
So he's 65. How old do you think his wife was? Or how old was the average age of death for a working class woman in 1861? Tick tock, tick
I
tock,
don't
tick
know.
tock,
What
tick
is
tock.
it?
53.
Really? Well, past
For
that.
men it's 47.
Right.
So it's possible that Hannah had died between 1851 and 1861. The 1861 census shows that Ralph was employed as an iron turner, working in a factory and using a lathe to turn iron, producing the factory into bars. Anne had found employment as a power loom weaver. This followed her mother's occupation, but at the time reflected the inexorable move towards automation. So although Ralph Bagley was an iron turner in 1861, we do not know where he was working. The largest employers of the iron turners in the area were the large textile machinery manufacturing companies. It seems possible that he might have changed jobs to work at Dan Cole's factory. It is unlikely that at the age of 22 he would have been able to retrain as a spinner, but he may have found employment in the workshop at Moorhays Mill, where repairs in the mill machinery would have been undertaken. Whatever the nature of Ralph's job in Moorhay, it was likely to be here that he met Benjamin and formed a partnership that flourished over the next 40 years.
All right. You do know it with words, don't you? There's not been any.
Not been anything yet that I can't pronounce.
Mm.
The presence of cotton spinning, coal mining, and iron founding can be seen in the jobs that the Wright and Bagley families were involved in 1861. In addition to Bagley's job as an iron turner and Wright's cotton spinning, Wright's daughter Hannah, Benjamin's sister, had married Jacob Marland from Ashton, whose family was related to the Marland family who owned Boa Colliery. Jacob ran a small operation that employed 5 miners in Ashton, with 2 of his employees living as lodgers in his house. So they're paying money.
Yeah. You think they'd be like raking it in, wouldn't you?
So the partnership between Benjamin and Ralph, but at this time, did anybody own properties? Because I know I've watched like Victorian Farm and stuff like that, where the property's actually rented to them and they've got to pay the rent. Mm-hmm. Is this a time when they actually do own houses, or a time when they don't own houses? Maybe they don't own the house. Maybe it was rented.
I don't know. Doesn't say, does it?
The partnership between Benjamin Wright and Ralph Bagley was based on friendship as well as business acumen. And in the mid-1860s, the textile industry in Lancashire was undergoing one of its periods of rapid growth. The American Civil War that started in 1861 and caused the Lancashire cotton famine, cotton towns, ended in 1865. I actually didn't know there was a cotton famine, but despite the famine during the first half of the decade, recovery afterwards was rapid and the cotton industry responded with a period of exuberant growth. So for anyone with necessary skills, knowledge and acceptance of risk, we all know about them mills, don't we? This was a time when entering into business was relatively easy. Budding entrepreneurs could rent space and power from the mill owner operating as a commercial landlord. In many cases, the entrepreneur would rent a floor of the mill,
Rent,
which was served by line shafting powered by a steam engine somewhere else in the building. It reminds me of Wigan Pier.
Oh yeah.
It's not an old Wigan Pier. I don't even think they do any like museum tours or anything. It's so sad. I used to love going there. The floor might already have machinery, spinning mules, carding engines or looms installed, or he might have approached a cotton machinery manufacturer who would rent or lease machinery to him. If upfront cash was a problem, the banks are likely to oblige to a loan. Of course they are.
Oh yeah, of course.
So by 1863, Bagley and Benjamin had left their positions at Dan Cole's factory and had set up a partnership with Samuel Milne, a major figure in Oldham's cotton industry. The business called Bagley, Wright and Milne started in part of an old, even then it was old, in brackets, shed in Rose Street in 1867. Wright's younger brother Joseph also joined this enterprise. Joseph Wright had started work in 1850 when he was 9 years old. His first employment was in Jennygate, but he graduated to minder and overlooker before taking a management role in the Bagley and Wright concern. I love the words that we use.
Yeah.
Concern.
Yeah. I suppose you have to find these words, don't you, to make it sound more important.
Most of the Roscoe Street shed was taken up with looms, but there was some spinning capacity on mules. I think of shed as like a garden shed, but these aren't garden sheds. These are great big massive warehouses,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
But there was some spinning capacity on mules available for renting. So when I talk about mules, I talk about donkeys, aren't they?
Well, a mule is.
They turn the thing.
Oh, right, yeah.
They're turning the wheel.
There's a donkey and a mule are different, aren't they? It's a different animal.
Can you imagine how it smells? Someone has to clean that up. I guess that's the job for that little boy.
Yes, yeah.
Is that what they
Yeah,
did?
probably, yeah.
Oh, my cat's coming down now. Also around this time, Bagley and Benjamin Wright went into partnership with a spinner called John Marsden, the business being called John Marsden and Company, based in Crabtree Mill. All the partners of these concerns were followers of Wesleyan Methodism in Goldwich, which was going for a period of rapid growth, both in terms of numbers and followers and confidence. That's a church. In the second half of the 19th century, Wesleyan in particular and Methodism in general were seen as a religion of choice for the upwardly mobile middle classes because of the encouragement that it gave its adherents to better themselves through work and enterprise. to the business growth from 1870 to 1880. While the Wright brothers were dividing their time between business and church, their business associates were given time to other aspects of public work. The Chatham Board of Health had been formed rather belatedly in 1872 following government legislation. One of the first board members was Joseph Wright's future business partner, Jacob Travers, who was elected to it for the 1873 fall session. Also elected in that year was John Morland, a colliery proprietor. John was the brother of Hannah Wright's husband, Jacob. 10 years later, Ralph Bagley would be elected as chairman of the committee. So in November of 1875, Bagley and Benjamin, well, this spelling is very name differently. Yeah, there's a typo. Well, withdrew from John Morrison and Company to enable them to concentrate on their partnership with Samuel Milne. However, in 1877, the partnership with Samuel Milne had to come to an end, and Bagley and Wright were trading under the name Bagley and Wright from the Wellington and Leeds mills, and Joseph Wright, mill manager at the Wellington. From these mills, they manufactured crochet, embroidery, tatting. What's tatting? And bonnet cotton, as well as sewing thread. I want to know what tatting is. You don't have to do that. You could just write tatting. And it would have come out.
Is it double T?
Yeah, ING. There you go. Oh, they're like doilies.
Oh, is that lacy?
Tatting is
It's
a
like
technique for handcrafting a particularly durable lace from the series of knots and loops. Tatting has been used to make lace edging, as well as dollies, collars, accessories such as earrings and necklaces and other decorative pieces. Yeah, it kind of looks like a doily. And really old-fashioned lacy collars.
I don't think you can see it.
I don't think so. Quite pretty, actually. The latter have been a relatively new introduction to their line. They were also producing fishing net twine, something they had become known and respected over many years. The growth of the company had, up to 1877, been rapid, and they now saw a commercial and operative to appear daily, not necessarily personally at the Manchester Royal Cotton Exchange, but the cotton market for Lancashire was based. Hi Jill, how are you?
Hello, welcome, hope you're well.
Glad to catch you both live.
It's lovely, thank
My
you.
mum's over here from the UK. Hay spinners try to get the best deals for raw cotton from the importers of American cotton, while simultaneously getting the highest available price for their yarn from weaving businesses. While assisting in the development of the Bagley and Wright business, Joseph Wright was developing a business in its own right. Although Wellington Mill was at 1877 an integral part of the Bagley and Wright operations, it also provided the manufacturing base for a separate business called Travis Freeman and Wright that was owned by Jack Travis. Thomas Freeman and Joseph, like the Wright brothers, Jack Travis and Thomas Freeman were devout Wesleyans, so their meeting and partnership was not entirely happenstance. However, whereas Benjamin and Joseph were new kids on the block, Jack's was old money, his family having been involved with the cotton industry for the early 19th century. Indeed, although he was involved in several enterprises, his input was financial rather than active, so he was just a silent partner. When he was elected at the Chatterton Board of Health, his employment was listed as gentleman.
What?
His employment was listed as gentleman.
Oh.
A clear indication that he did not need to work to maintain his income. By 1881, Benjamin's family employed an additional domestic help, a 20-year-old servant called Harriet Mills. Having 2 or more domestic servants was the norm for cotton masters in Oldham at the time. I don't know how this is important to the story, so there we go.
So I suppose basically at the end of the day, he's made it, hasn't he? Because he's become a gentleman, hasn't he? And
He's made it because he's become a gentleman.
yeah.
Over the period during which Bagley and Wright and Travis and Wright were consolidating the business, house construction struggled to keep abreast of the growth in worker numbers in Oldham. Most houses were in terraces, amid to provide workers with good sanitation and water supply. Although trams served as many part of the town, transport was still essentially by horse and carriage. For this reason, workers' houses had to be near to the place of work. Both Benjamin and Joseph lived in terraced housing until about 1875. The same sort of housing that would be used by their employees. This was considered normal, and only the most affluent mill owners might be expected to move into houses reflecting their level of income. And in 1881, Benjamin was 43 years old and Anne was 40, living in Twine. Now had 3 children. In 1871, Ralph had married, and by 1881, he and his wife Betsy had 4 children. Competition from other UK-based spinning companies, as well as an increasing flow of imported yarn and finished cloth, made it essential to secure supply of raw cotton and markets for the spun thread, and the company responded to these market pressures by consolidating both the supply and demand side of the operation. When I was what was that road called where I used to walk up to school, and it had the rock factory on it and like the leather shops and that? Oh, didn't it? There was a clothing place up there, wasn't there, at one point? Or am I wrong? Like they used to make clothes, didn't they?
Yeah, there was a textile.
Was that happening still when I was going to school, or had that closed down before I went to school?
No, I think it was still going on that.
Because the road that Chadwick
Because they used to sell stuff as well, didn't they? Remember they used to sell
Did they used to,
shoes and that?
and did they used to sell it to like Marks and Spencer's, their clothes?
No.
No.
I think so.
Okay.
No. Just,
No, as you were saying, it's nice that your mum's visiting.
yes, it is very nice. We've got lots of snow.
There is lots of snow,
Freezing.
and it's very cold.
Very cold.
Very, very cold. In 1887, the company had established an office in Liverpool, so that it had a presence on the Liverpool Cotton Exchange to enable it to buy raw cotton at the lowest price. In 1887, well, I think it was also they were connected as well with Liverpool, with the canals.
The canals, yeah.
The canal
Yeah,
connected
yeah.
everything.
Yeah, it was everything. It was all the way around Lancashire.
And it was the cheapest way of getting the product over
Yeah.
to like, and then
From
from there they'd probably send it off onto ships or what, and
Yeah.
all the ships would be bringing the cotton in, wouldn't they?
From Liverpool, yeah.
But I'm not about from like the foreign places as well. They would
Yeah,
be bringing
but
in
Liverpool,
like,
where the docks
Yeah,
were, wasn't it?
yeah. In 1886, Bagley and Wright brought out the business and trade mark in Mazes William Clapton, who were sewing thread manufacturers in Paisley, Scotland. Around this time, they also brought into other businesses, including the Crooklands Bobbin Mill, to secure the supply of bobbins, and Spooling Mill in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, to prepare their sewing threads exported for the North American market, and thereby avoid large import taxes introduced by the Canadian government. The Spooling Mill premises also provided a facility for the storage of finished cloth made by their woodtop mills in Burnley. In the later half of the 19th century, profit margins in the spinning industry came under increasing pressure, in addition to the growing strengths of workers' groups like the Operative Cotton Spinners Association. Competition from abroad was increasing due to the export of automated textile machinery, something that had been unlawful until 1843. The growth in overseas yarn production also caused shortages in supply of raw cotton and raised raw cotton prices, putting further pressure on margins. The Lancashire cotton trade suffered a series of depressions during which the relationship between workers and mill owners became strained. Workers were asked by the Master Cotton Spinners Association to accept cuts in wages, and when these requests were met with militant action by the operative associations, the masters introduced lockdowns that were intended to put financial pressure on the operatives.
It happens all the time, doesn't it?
I know, but it wasn't really fair, was it? Because
No.
it wasn't fair on anybody really. It wasn't fair on the guy who owned it. It wasn't fair on the workers either, because of what was going on abroad. In addition to the short-term tactics like lockouts, the masters concluded that one way of controlling costs and income was to form syndicates, which the objective of exerting better control over the market in which they operated. To a certain extent, Bagley and Wright had been at the forefront of this type of strategy by extending their business into the supply side. So throughout most of their existence, the company have manufactured fishing net twine, cotton yarn of all types, except the very finest threads. The high-quality sewing thread, this later product was especially successful and sales grew strongly during the 1800s. And by 1881, the sewing cotton side of the business had grown to such an extent that it had been decided to build a new state-of-the-art mill. The company bought land off Honeywell Lane, Oldham, and erected Belgrave Mill, which subsequently became known as Belgrave No. 1 Mill. As a further 3 mills were erected on the site in the early part of the 20th century, yarn produced at the Belgrave No. 1 Mill was bleached or dyed in an on-site facility. Belgrave No. 1 was designed by the architect Potts, Pickup and Dixon, a leading firm in mill architecture in Lancashire. No expense was spared, including the fitting of the steam engine built by Luston, Humes and Wright. So they need that to turn the wheel. There's all that big wheel in Wigan Pier that helps to power the machinery, I think.
What, the water?
Yeah.
The water, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
They've still got that in like behind glass and everything. In addition to Belgrave Mill, the company now owned Industry Mill, Crabtree Mill, and Livinger Shed in Burnley, as well as other mills. By 1889, the company had purchased a weaving mill near Burnley to provide an additional market for their yarns. And in 1890, they increased their capacity by renting part of Woodtop Mill. The success of the company was reflected in the change of residence for both Benjamin and Ralph. Sometime between 1881 and 1891, Benjamin and Anne moved their family to recently built houses on Queen's Road, overlooking Belgrave 1. This change reflects the family's growing wealth and status within the community, and Benjamin's home at No. 1 I nearly reread something then. 53 was only a few doors away from No. 67 where Ralph and his family lived, until moving to Edward Street. Due to illness, Thomas Freeman withdrew from the Travis Freeman and Wright business in September of 1888, and the business carried on with the remaining 2 partners under the title of Travis and Wright. Well, I think that something's going to happen eventually. But it's like it's
It's
brewing.
it's like all these mills. We've got quite a few of them in Preston, Lancashire, in the UK, and they were built to last.
Well, they've all changed as well, haven't they? They're all hotels now.
No,
No?
no, not hotels. No, they've been made into apartments and accommodation, which is really it's great. They're solid. They were built to last. And
Do you
it's
reckon they're haunted? Me and my haunted.
no, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. I don't know. When I was
They have
looking
high
around,
ceilings.
they do, because I went to view some when I was looking for a different house and whatever, and I did look into them. They are very tall ceilings, really really tall. They're lovely. They're beautiful. They've made good jobs out of
You have
them.
a few in Preston, don't you?
Yes, there's quite a lot of them.
Isn't the one that used to be an antique place as well, right down the bottom of the corner there?
Yeah.
Is it still an antique place, or is it's changed now?
No, that's still antique.
Okay.
One, it's like one, two, three levels of that, and next door to that, that's
The travel lodge thing.
the travel lodge.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
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 So by the late 19th century, the company had established a large warehouse and office block on Cannon Street in central Manchester, and the second warehouse on the junction of Union Street, Oldham. In 1890, Bagley and Wright occupied Woodtop Mill to further complement their weaving capacity. And on 28th of December 1892, a memorandum was written by Ralph to J. Fielding, secretary of the Operative Cotton Spinners Association, the Spinners Trade Union, informing him that the forthcoming meeting had been cancelled. The heading of the memorandum lists the company's mills as Wallington Industry and Belgrave in Oldham, and Woodtop Shed in lists the company's mills as Wallington Industry and Belgrave in Oldham, and Woodtop Shed in I'm reading the same freaking line. In the archives of Burnley Library as a reference written on Bagley Wright notepaper in 1895 for a Mr. John Watson, who has been in our company for over 5 years as an overlooker, and have always been found him a steady hand and competent workman. The reference is signed by R. Sager and Bagley Wright. In 1895, the company's sewing cotton business was still expanding, and a considerable investment was made in the extension of the Belgrave mill to provide greater manufacturing capacity. In 1895, several British producers of sewing cotton yarn opened discussion on how they might combine their assets and markets to protect themselves from increasing competition from overseas, and the companies decided to form a conglomerate through which they would be in a better position to cooperate on the purchase of raw material and combine markets of their products. The aim was to cooperate rather than compete. There we go. Around 1893, the company bought a mill at Crooklands to secure the supply of bobbins that they needed. The bobbin mill at Crooklands lay between Milthorpe and Kendal, the English Lake District. Oh, don't even get me started.
Oh God, it's beautiful.
I love the English Lake District.
Yes.
Was a major centre for the production of bobbins because of the availability of trees to use as raw materials and watercourses to drive water wheels to power the machinery. The Crookland mill was built sometime before it was taken over by Bagley and Wright, who certainly owned it between 1894 and 1897, and in 1906 the mill had passed into the ownership of Myers A. Bell and Co. So it is possible that the mill was retained by Bagley and Wright until after Benjamin's death in 1905. So the Bobbin mill made use of an old horse-drawn tramway that passed closely by on an embankment. The tramway was originally built to serve a large gunpowder factory at nearby Gateback, and the factory was owned by Wakefield and Co., one of the largest manufacturers of gunpowder in Great Britain in the 18th century. The tramway had horses pulling wagons and gunpowder. I nearly read that the horses were pulling wagons on gunpowder.
Oh,
That would have been
God.
fast.
That would have been super fast.
The tramway had horses pulling wagons of gunpowder from the factory to a wharf on the Lancaster Canal, where it was dispatched to mines or to the military. See? The canal.
The canals, yes.
The canal.
Yes,
I love the canals.
yes.
They're good for bike riding
Mm-hmm.
and walking.
Yeah.
The
And
horses
seeing the ducks.
and seeing the dogs.
Yeah.
Is there a canal? There's got to be one near you somewhere now.
Well, yeah, there'll be quite a few.
Somewhere.
Yeah, but
You need to get a
not-
bike. Are you going to get a bike?
I don't know
You
yet.
need to get yourself one of them old-fashioned teal bikes with a
I know,
basket
yeah.
and like go.
Keep wanting one of those. Really like that.
The horses were shod in copper shoes so that sparks would not ignite the gunpowder. Oh, that makes sense. You don't want that setting off when you're walking down the road. Before 1900, the tramway had been extended from the canal wharf to Middlethorpe, where there was by then a railway station. In 1867, the Cutlings Mill had been powered by a water wheel with a mill stream taken off the nearby Peasley Beck. At this stage, the mill consisted of about 3 buildings, and bobbins must have been transported to the canal by horse and cart. And by 1900, a spur line had been built from the tramway across the Peasley Beck into an open shed in the mill grounds, where this evidenced the mill stabled horses to be used in pulling wagons of bobbins onto the main tramway line and down the canal and onward to the station in Middlethorpe. A lot of work going into carrying these bobbins, eh? And I can't even bother going up and downstairs to get a new one. I need to get a horse.
Me. Me.
The mule.
Yeah, the mule.
In 1895, the company's sewing cotton business was still expanding, and a considerable investment was made in the extension of the Belgrave No. 1 mill to provide greater manufacturing. In 1897, 14 companies involved in the spinning of cotton combined to form the English Sewing Company Limited. In all cases, the directors or proprietors of each of the individual companies became directors of the ESCC, while some of the individual companies had previously only been involved with the manufacture of sewing cotton. So Belgrave No. 1 mill was completely turned over to the manufacture of sewing cotton and was the Bagley and Wright contribution to the ESCC. Bagley and Wright's own manufacturing activities were carried out in their other mills. From this point on, there was 2 listings for Bagley and Wright in the trade directories at the time. In 1898, the ESCC made a decision to enter the American market by purchasing a number of New England mills in the USA. These acquisitions included the Willimantic Linen Company, where consolidation into American Thread Company. Other than for the observation that Benjamin's sons had stayed at school longer was the norm for less affluent families. The jobs that they took on after leaving school relatively menial. In 1881, at the age of 18, his son Herbert was a clerk within Bagley and Wright's business. 10 years later, in 1891, sons George and Frank were bookkeepers. Perhaps the greatest deviation from the work from the bottom idea was that the sons did not have to experience the manual jobs of piecing and spinning. They skipped. They skipped ahead. You had high expectations of them, and now it's lowered.
Yeah.
Clearly, the aim was to provide the sons with experience of various positions within the business to prepare them for future ownership. Because the business was so extensive, other family members could also be brought in and groomed for future management. Fush Henry, the eldest son of Benjamin's brother Joseph, was a clerk at Wallington Mill in 1891, while his father was the proprietor of Travison's Wright at the same mill. By 1901, Joseph's second son, Benjamin, we will call him Benjamin Jr. to identify him from his uncle, was a warehouseman at Bagley and Wright Union Street warehouse.
I'm trying to find out what it is now. It just keeps coming up as a garage. I can't see all that great big massive building being a garage.
The ESCC operation hit stormy waters in the 20th century. The investment that the company had to commit in forming the American Thread Company was much larger than originally estimated, and returns were slow to materialise. The value of shares in the ESCC dropped sharply. An article in the Guardian newspaper in April of 1902 noted that an extraordinarily general meeting of the ESCC directors and shareholders was to take place on 23rd. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the company's position in regards to its management and finances, and inquire into the reasons for the loss of share value, and take steps to reorganise the company's board. The shareholders were concerned that a large amount of the ESCC money had been placed in a reserve fund for the purpose of paying a dividend to shareholders. The problem from the point of view of most shareholders was that the directors of the mills in the US that had been brought out to form the ATCO had been issued with large numbers of ATCO and ESCC shares as part of the consolidation. The effect was that share value had been diluted. Solicitors and accountants working on behalf of the shareholders stated that the use of the reserve fund was for the payment of the dividends could be illegal under English law. Prior to this meeting, the ESCC board consisted of 24 directors, all of whom were directors of the individual companies that had combined to form the holdings of 1897, plus several directors of American companies. To improve management efficiency, we decided that the board membership should be reduced to 12, with half of its numbers being ordinary shareholders, unconnected with either the individual ESCC enterprises or the ATCO mills.
When you start getting big in your business, it starts getting a bit, I don't know, ridiculous, doesn't it?
Right.
Why do you have to have all these?
Complicated.
Yeah.
Well, the moment where you have shareholders that are helping, well, they're buying shares, so they're involved in your business now. You don't have like a private business anymore, really. It's like it's public.
Yeah, exactly. It just gets complicated, doesn't it?
From the ESCC's perspective, the collection of firms that forms the basis of their operation was identified as being inefficient. Whenever there was a turn down in the market for sewing thread, the overheads due to running numerous mills, each with its own management administration structure, was a liability. And by 1905, the company had decided that concentration was required and steps were taken to reduce overheads. So in 1905, the year of Benjamin's death, Ralph Bagley was 66. So the English Sewing Cotton Company's report from 25th of July 1907 listed the following results of the concentration were. So a linen thread mill was sold to round off the trust sphere of business. The production of the Egerton mill was transferred, and the report explaining that the trust had sufficient reserve production capacity at other mills to enable them to deal with the trade conducted at that branch. And the plant of the Belgrave mill in Oldham was removed, and the site and the buildings were sold. Turned into that garage.
I don't know. I was trying to find out what it might be today, but it just keeps coming up as this garage.
You'd have to go through. You have to go to the library and have a look at all the historical things. So with this policy of concentration, output was centralised by the connection of the ESCC with Myers Coates and the system of common cells established in 1906 through a newly formed organisation called the Central Thread Agency. The net profits of the ESCC greatly increased following that step, though for the most part this was due to improved market conditions, and the net trade profit for the ESCC had been 170,000 in 1904 and only 92,000 in 1905. Rose to 204,000 in 1907, was maintained in 1908 as 251,000. Oldham family records and archives have records of those enabled for jury service. Around the turn of the 19th century, the records provide an interesting insight into the wealth of the people on the list because it gives the amount of money for which each person has been assessed to contribute to the poor rate of the borough. Juries had been the property owners because this was seen as a measure of responsibility, and the entries of Ralph Bagley, Benjamin Wright, and George Wright in 1903 showed that Ralph Bagley carried a poor rate assessment of £420, while Benjamin Wright was £276, and both were identified as special jurors. So there would have been a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it would have been.
Being defined as a special juror depended entirely on the amount that had been assessed for poor rate, and this in turn depended on the wealth of the individual, measured by the value of the property that they inhabited. In 19th century England, for several decades after the end of the Victorian reign, an Englishman of wealth and standing could, if required to defend him or herself in the court of law, request that the jury was construed from the peers on the grounds that they would not be adversely prejudiced, and special jurors were those who might be called upon to stand as jurors for a trial. It was not until 1949 that this privilege of the wealthy and landed gentry was repelled. Benjamin Wright died on the 5th of May 1905 at a home on Queen Street, Oldham. Have you ever been asked to do jury duty?
Yeah, but it got cancelled.
It got cancelled.
Oh God, that was years and years ago.
Neil got asked to be in jury duty in Canada, but we can't because we are permanent resident. We're not citizens of Canada,
No.
so yeah. So we had to fill out the form to say so, and then they took it. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. You got cancelled mine, so.
Oh gosh. Anybody else been asked to do jury duty?
Oh no, it was awful. I'm panicking.
As benefiting his status within the town, his funeral was in the finest Victorian tradition. The description of the cortege in the Oldham Chronicle on the 9th of May describes the scene. After noting that the interment was at Green Acres Cemetery in Oldham, the article lists the occupants of the 9 carriages, each drawn by 2 bay horses. It's probably the same horses that are carrying the gunpowder.
No, they were mules, weren't they?
No, the mules were the one going around and round with
Oh.
the thing. No, they had horses doing the gunpowder. In addition to his widow and 70 members of his close family, the cortege include Ralph Bagley and his wife, representatives of the church, and the major cotton industrialists from the town. In his will, Benjamin left a net of 33,000, which is over 13 million back in 2006. His will detailed his wishes that his private and business assets be formed into a trust for the benefit of the children, the grandchildren. His widow and eldest son, Herbert, were trustees, and Herbert was to take over the running of Bagley Wright in place of his father. Jack Travis died in 1907, and Travis and Wright business was formally dissolved in January of 1908. 2 years later, after the death of his wife, Joseph Wright retired, and he was to live another 20 years. So after the sale of the Belgrave No. 1 mill by ESCC, the new owners built 3 new mills on the site. These were... why? They just so... They did not read the news.
What do you think they looked into the future?
But they were dissolved because they weren't making any money. And now these guys come along and they buy new and they build new mills.
There must have been some of that they were
In 1907, 1910 and 1914. So that's the war.
Yeah, but they would be making things for the forces, wouldn't they?
You
know,
were paid. They've been making it, yeah. But then you just make it, don't you?
They must have been getting paid for it.
Respectfully, number 3 mill was the first in Oldham to be powered entirely by electricity. And in 1919, Herbert Wright reformed and consolidated the independent non-ESCC Bagley and Wright manufacturing, operated into a limited company. And by 1924, this company was dissolved and the assets sold. Herbert died the 10th of October in 1934, leaving net assets of 27,000, which is 5 million in 2006. And in 1927, Bagley and Wright Limited was still being quoted in the Oldham Stock Exchange. Oh, in 1927? Okay. When does this all start? In 1837.
It was quite a legacy then, wasn't it?
It was. At this time, the business had 200,000 £1 shares that were valued at 14 shillings and 9 pence. You had been decimal. Did you have to work in shillings?
Yeah, when I was.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Are you old enough to remember shillings?
I am old enough to. Yeah. Pounds,
Was it
shillings and pence.
complicated when it went over to?
Well, you know what I'm. It was what the heck's the? What's it?
Wait, how old were you?
Oh goodness gracious! I can't. Do you know? I really can't remember when.
Were you like a teenager, or were you
No.
at school?
I was at school, and we were still in juniors, I think it was.
I mean, it's not like people like being transferred over to Euro, like, you know, when they went to the Euro, they'd have to
Yeah.
learn a whole new currency then.
I didn't like maths at school anyway.
I don't like maths.
I hated maths. Then this currency just changed all of a sudden. It was like, I have to learn all this new stuff all over again.
So its capital value was £151,000 and the owner claims stood at 123,000. Liabilities were £36,000 and the profit and loss account showed a deficit of 86,000. The end. It was kind of interesting. It reminded me of the mills.
Yeah.
Not that I worked in them or anything.
No, but it's nice that people had done all this stuff and they built these big massive buildings and to last, and they're still going strong to this day. I mean, I
don't like it when they get rid of buildings, like old
No,
buildings,
no.
and they put glass and steel up.
Do they what have they done with the mills here? They haven't taken them down, have they? Because I know they haven't in the UK because they reuse them for homes.
There's nothing like that like here. I mean, there's old-fashioned like buildings downtown, but they don't really rejuvenate them because sometimes it costs more money to rejuvenate them than it is just to actually just knock them down, which I think is really sad.
Yeah, I don't understand why they want to knock things down when if they're built sturdy enough. What's wrong?
I don't think some of them are though, to be fair. But I'm sure there's a lot more like historical things like that in the United States than the public will. It's prairie land here though, isn't it? It's probably all based around farming and stuff in.
Yeah, but you must have had mills here.
Well, they have the corn things, don't they? The corn tower things and that.
Well, if anybody knows what have they done with their old buildings, you know.
We want to know specifically about cotton mills.
Yeah, your cotton mills and that. Are they still going strong?
Anyway. Quick, run. Thank you very much for watching.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.